So, Mike, thanks for joining us. Cebu Pacific is growing. You seem to have had a great start to the year, but 2024 is it fair to say that 2024 was a setup for 25? I mean, it seemed like it was a good year unto itself, but was it more of just trying to get everything in place so that this year would be a solid one?
No, I think that is a good description. It really was, I think, setting up the right foundations for hopefully 2025, where we get a clear run with some strong capacity growth. Let's go back to 2024. We ended 2024 with 24.5 million passengers, which was actually 9% up versus 2019. So it was the first time that we'd actually got through the pre-COVID sort of levels of traffic. And worth reminding ourselves that actually the Philippines and Southeast Asia, people sort of say, there's lots of growth happening now, but during the pandemic, we were probably the worst affected out there. So it did take a while for us to get through that level of the passenger traffic that we had in 2019. But having got there, 9% growth versus 2019 at the end of 2024. Now we've just started January. We've got 33% passenger traffic growth over 2024. So it's a massive growth on 31% capacity. So not only is it high capacity, but we're filling it and the load factors are increasing. Now, two things in that. One is demand's really good. The second one is we're the only ones that can do it, and I think this is the bit that we set up in 2024. Our local competitors aren't yet at the levels that they were pre-pandemic, so in some ways there's that space that they're leaving. Plus, of course, the economy is doing well, so it's creating that demand. But yes, this has been hard work to get here. We've got all of the issues with Pratt Whitney, we've got all of the issues with Airbus delivery delays. So last year, or rather in the last 18 months, we brought in a ton of additional aircraft that we never anticipated. So we brought in aircraft, not only the deliveries that we get direct from Airbus, but short-term leases. So we might bring in aircraft at a second-hand CEO. It's not something we normally do, but maybe on a three-year lease, just to cover for the Pratt Whitney situation. So last year, we brought in 17 additional aircraft. We also brought in 13 spare engines that we acquired just to give us the capability to grow despite the Pratt & Whitney issues. So as we sit here today, we've got 10 long-term AOGs with Pratt & Whitney. It's actually slightly less than we thought it would be, which is why our growth is actually in the 30s. We thought it might be in the 20s. But it's a good position to be in, but it took an awful lot of hard work to get here. Now, managing that level of growth, of course, brings its own issues, because you've got to put it in, and the market has got to grow into that. I mean, it doesn't happen straight away overnight. And actually, that growth, where it materialized, was in Q3 last year. So we had to, and Q3 is the worst, unlike Q3 in pretty much the rest of the world. July, August, and September are really weak in the Philippines. So we had that big growth coming in Q3, which of course impacted us from a bottom line point of view. But by the time we got into Q4, by the time we got to December, the market had matured very well, particularly out of Manila, particularly on the international routes, and so we were able to end December very strongly, and we started this year again very strongly. We've pretty much grown into that capacity now, and so that will carry on through this year. It won't stay at 30% probably in the peak months, so January's a peak month. We'll drop it off a bit in February and March. We actually do have to manage the Pratt & Whitney issue, so we manage cycle usage, so we'll drop the cycles during the low season, but then April, May, we'll up the capacity again. I reckon through this year, our capacity growth will maybe be around 26% over the full year, and then going into next year, 12% growth. So this is a good growth rate, economy that's doing well, market that's doing well, competition isn't able to add the capacity that we're able to do. So it looks good. The challenge is going to make it happen, because the managing fleet at the moment has never been harder. I mean, the airlines have got better at dealing with the supply chain issues, basically because we've got the scars now. We've added in contingency, we've added in spare engines, added in spare aircraft. But we do fleet planning now on a weekly basis. I mean, you have to. Back in the day, we did it once or twice a year. Now we're doing it once a week.
So let me ask, you're part of Indigo, right?
Indigo's an investor.
Right.
Indigo's an investor, one of many.
Does their role as an investor help you get spare aircraft if you need it from some of their carriers who may have excess capacity, or is that not?
No, I mean, it's something that we could do. It's not something that we are utilising.
Okay.
I mean, we do have conversations. We share some knowledge. I mean, we don't cross confidentiality boundaries, obviously, but we do share some knowledge and maybe some best practice. So Indigo Partners is not only a helpful investor in the fact that they provided some capital when we were looking to raise capital during the pandemic, but they bring a lot of intellectual capital as well with them.
Right, but it's not like you could go to, say, Frontier and say, hey, do you have a couple of extra Airbuses that we could lease?
No, we could do. I mean, there is the capability to do it. It's not something that we've done at the moment. It's something that we may look at doing. Because interestingly enough, their peak season is our off-season, and our off-season is their peak season. So there is the potential to do some of that. And actually, most of the carriers, of course, have all got the same issues, GTF and, of course, Airbus as well in terms of the delivery delays. But no, it's not just those manufacturers I've talked about. This is across the board.
Right.
I mean, every OEM is suffering.
So as you look at the challenge with the Pratt Whitney engines, do you think this will be the worst year in terms of getting through it? Will you be able, based on what Pratt Whitney is telling you, do you think that next year will be better?
I think Pratt & Whitney are now on top of understanding the issue, and I think things are starting to improve. In fact, the outlook from Pratt & Whitney for pretty much most people is starting to improve. The change now is they're starting to be able to get some components and materials into the shop. So one of the big issues has been engines going into or sitting in the parking lot outside of the overhaul shop because there's no actual parts to actually put into the engines if they go in. Now the parts are starting to get there, so the turn times should improve. But this has still got another 2 or 3 years to run. There's no question, but I think the visibility that's being given to the airlines, what they call the line of balance in terms of how many AOGs you're going to have, is now a little bit more predictable. I say a little bit more predictable. I had a line of balance 3 weeks ago that's already changed. Yeah, so these are the things you've got to adjust. But I would say Pratt & Whitney's on top of it, more so than ever before, but we've also got these issues with all the OEMs. I mean, we've got to manage. There's issues on all the engine platforms, and of course all the aircraft manufacturers. So Airbus potentially got more delivery delays to announce sometime soon. Let's see. I hope not, but that's a concern.
Okay. So you mentioned that you've had to become an expert in disruption management because of natural disasters like volcanoes or weather or whatever. You add that to the challenge of doing weekly fleet planning. It must be nerve-wracking in terms of leadership and for your operations folks, but it also must be frustrating for passengers too. So what are some of the things you've had to do to learn to be a master of disruption, if you will?
Well, I wouldn't say we're a master of disruption. I think we're probably pretty good at it. I mean, and in part because we've had so much practice. So we've had to get good at it because we've got scars. And it's fair to say some disruption, of course, inevitably is caused by yourself, but we do get a lot of external factors in the Philippines. It could be earthquakes, could be typhoons. We had 4 typhoons on the trot, literally in the month leading up to Christmas. So hugely disruptive. But of course, some of it is things that you should be able to control better. Now, when you suddenly get a whole load of AOGs, which happened when the Pratt & Whitney issue first materialized, then that is painful because ultimately the real pain is the disruption it caused to passengers. At short notice, you've got to try and reaccommodate them. There might not be ability to reaccommodate them because it's the other aircraft are full, so you run into real issues. So out of necessity, we were already having to get good because of all the natural environment things. I think our need to get even better was accelerated by the supply chain issues that we've had. So we've invested greatly in technology, but also putting protocols in place in terms of how to escalate crisis situations. It could be an IT-related issue, it could be an operational issue. Anything now goes through a very sort of specific crisis protocol to make sure that we're addressing it promptly and we're taking the right actions. And ultimately, that we're getting the information out to the consumer as soon as possible, and information that is credible and gives them options.
So a question I have is when bad weather or some type of disruption like that occurs, you're presumably trying to sell every seat on every flight that you can. How do you work to accommodate people and get them on their way when you're experiencing these challenges?
Well, I mean, various different ones. I mean, you'll give them reaccommodation options. Again, the technology platforms will provide you that. So if a flight is disrupted, then straight away we will provide the customer with options for rebooking, and obviously we'd like to do that in the same day. So obviously in domestic we've got multiple frequencies, so there's a reasonable chance that we'll do that. Maybe not in the super peak, of course, because in the super peak there won't be, I mean, we fly over 90% load factors in domestic, so there won't be an awful lot of seats there, which is then when you'll have to put in extra sections. So this is why we now carry a higher proportion of standby aircraft than we ever used to. So, you know, we literally have had to put in an extra 1 or 2 aircraft, which has its cost, by the way, but which is ultimately a necessity. But we have destinations in the Philippines, just to sort of give you a specific of the sort of things we have to deal with. So there are airfields in the Philippines, so sort of short runways, where no instrument navigation systems, so VFR. And often the aircraft, the weather report that we'll get from that station is probably not great. So the only way you'll really get a weather report is when you actually fly down towards it and actually see for yourself. So on a number of occasions we will take off the aircraft. It'll be an ATR more often than not because it's a short runway, so we're not operating a jet, and it will have to come back. And when it comes back, we then have to cancel the service. We then have to create a new service for those passengers. So we need to carry an extra ADR just to then be able to go and serve them maybe the next day or the day after. Some may choose not to travel, but some, if they really want to get there, and most of our passengers do want to get there, then we'll have to offer an extra service. So these are the very specific things that we have. We don't have people talk about infrastructure being tarmac, about being terminals, but actually navigation aids is something that obviously in the majority of airfields we have good navigation aids, but a lot of them don't, still VFR.
Is the government stepping up to make the investments necessary for that infrastructure?
No, absolutely. I think that's one of the big stories about the Philippines, and why I think the Philippines is a good story now. I mean, it's a good story first of all from an economic growth point of view. I mean, it's a happening place. The economy's doing well. GDP is back on that treadmill, 6% per year, every year 6%. I mean, it's great to see. But the infrastructure, which has often held the country back, is coming in, and everyone talks about Manila. It's great to see Manila. Manila's been privatized now, and that's a big airport, so that's going to get more efficient. There's another new airport coming into Manila, which is Bulacan, which will come towards the end of this decade. That's great. But it's not just about Manila, and it's a point that we make, is that let's start investing outside of Manila in these regions. Manila has a catchment of maybe 30 million people, there and thereabouts. So that means there's another 80 to 90 million people out there in the Philippines. And so these people need to be served as well. Their economies are growing. And actually, when you move outside of Manila, the smaller cities, often the GDP growth is higher the growth rate is higher in those places. I mean, we've recently opened a couple of new bases. One's in Iloilo, one's in Davao. And it's not just to offer domestic flying, obviously there's plenty of that, but actually these places we're serving them on they've got international routes as well right from day one. So it's great to see the infrastructure going in, not just in Manila, but also in these provinces. And I think that's going to be part of the ambition of the government as far as we can see. The country needs it.
Okay. So last question before we go into the panel. Cebu is a younger airline than some of your competitors. But at the same time, it is an established business. How do you keep it fresh? Because LCCs have a reputation as a category for doing things different, for being a bit of a renegade against some of their older, shall we say, counterparts. At the same time, you need to find ways to evolve the brand, evolve the products, evolve everything you do, digital, to appeal to the customers you're serving.
No, I think it's a very good point. A lot of LCCs, as they've matured, they become more stable businesses. And I think one of the things that's prevented us from becoming a stable sort of run-of-the-mill business is we don't have stability in our operation, for example. We always have to be on our toes. And I think that's one of the things about how do you stay in a startup sort of mentality. Startups, you have to be on your toes all the time. And I think the environment that we're in the Philippines, or the environmental factors that we deal with means that you're kind of always on edge a little bit. I used to have more hair. I mean, I'm sure you did as well. I mean, both of us, we're getting on a bit. But the fact that you're on edge a little bit all the time, I think, keeps some of that spirit. You've got to be sharp. You've got to have energy. If you haven't got energy, then you're going to be in trouble. And I think that's one of the things about being an LCC and keeping the culture going. Yeah, you can have parties. Everyone has a party. You all get dressed up. And I mean, that's part of it. But I think it's keeping that edginess, that alertness. And part of that is not believing that everything's great and it's all going to be easy. So I'm sitting here at this moment in time saying, I've got a good year ahead of us, we're all set. But part of me as well is nervous about our ability to deliver it because there's just so many things, so many curveballs that can happen.
So complacency is the enemy.
Oh, absolutely. And, get a plan. By all means have a plan, but then put it down and go, good, I've got a baseline. But one thing's for certain, the world's going to look different to the plan that I've just done. So just accept that that's going to happen and be ready to deal with it.
Okay, great. The next thing that's going to look different is the stage, because we're going to invite the panelists up to join us. So with that, if we could have John and Stephen join us up on stage, we'll get started with the keynote panel.